The sea was calm that night, but every sailor aboard felt the weight of dread pressing heavier than the waves. Legends had always whispered of voices beneath these waters, of melodies too sweet to resist, of ships that never returned. The crew murmured nervously, eyes darting across the black horizon, and though no storm clouds formed, an unnatural stillness gnawed at them. The naval officer stood firm at the deck's edge, his gaze steady, his mind sharp. He had heard the stories but refused to bow to fear. Fear was weakness, and weakness was the first step to surrender. Then the voice rose. At first, it was a distant hum, like wind threading through hollow wood. The sound spread slowly across the sea, too pure to be natural, too precise to be chance. It seeped into bones, teased hearts, and loosened the discipline of hardened men. The hum grew into a melody, sweet enough to numb reason, pulling on the instincts of every sailor. Eyes glazed over, hands slackened from ropes, and the helm tilted under the compulsion of unseen hands. The song promised peace, promised release from hardship, promised something better than life itself. And yet, laced beneath the beauty, there was hunger. The ship shifted course, sliding as though possessed, its bow cutting directly toward a wall of jagged rocks hidden just beneath the surface. Some sailors cried out, others laughed in drunken bliss, but none resisted the pull. The officer barked orders, but his voice was swallowed by the melody. Men dropped their weapons, their will stolen by the song. The sea seemed to lean closer, waves rising in anticipation of the kill. Wood groaned under the sudden force as the hull scraped stone. The ship shuddered, then tore open with a scream of timber. Water surged across the deck, dragging bodies into the abyss. Chaos erupted, cries, splintering planks, the hiss of waves claiming flesh. Men reached for lifelines that were no longer there. One by one they vanished beneath the foam, thrashing swallowed by silence. Through it all, the voice never faltered. It grew sweeter, almost tender, a lullaby woven into catastrophe. The sailors obeyed willingly, stepping into the grave with vacant smiles, unable to resist the embrace of death disguised as beauty. The melody was no longer distant. It vibrated through marrow, filling lungs until water replaced air. The officer remained upright as the world collapsed around him. Salt water stung his eyes, wood and iron shattered, yet he did not scream. His jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed, his body braced for the inevitable. While others begged, cursed, or cried out in their final moments, he accepted the sea's claim with silence. Defiance radiated from him even as the ocean swallowed his chest, his throat, his head. The last thing he felt was the song pressing deeper, searching for a crack in his will. But it found none. Darkness closed in, weight pressed heavy, and the melody shifted from triumphant to questioning. Then, as the void consumed him, all sound vanished, leaving only the memory of a song that had failed to break him. You said. He woke to silence broken only by the faint pulse of water moving through unseen caverns. His chest burned, yet air filled his lungs, unnatural and heavy, as though the sea itself allowed him breath. The ground beneath was smooth stone, damp and cold, his arms held fast by living strands that tightened when he shifted. Around him, faint light shimmered from corals and strange flora, painting the cavern in hues of blue and green. He had survived the wreck, though survival felt closer to captivity than fortune. A shadow moved at the edge of the glow. She emerged with the grace of a predator, eyes unblinking, voice caught in her throat like restrained lightning. The Siren, her form as alluring as every tale had warned, yet veined with menace. Scales shimmered like polished obsidian, hair drifting with the current, face both beautiful and alien. She circled him, studying the way he held her gaze without flinching, as though she could not decide whether he was prey or puzzle. When she spoke, the sound was not language but resonance. Her hum spread through the cavern, low and curling, the same tone that had crushed his ship. Yet here it was muted, softer, probing. He did not answer, for words meant little underwater, but his eyes never wavered. Her hum faltered, then shifted, the razor-edge sweetness thinning until it resembled something quieter, hesitant, almost fragile. She sang again, and the notes carried not the command of death, but the rhythm of a lullaby. Her voice filled the space with warmth that felt wrong against the cold stone. It was no less powerful, yet instead of dragging him into oblivion, it seemed to press against his mind like an offering. Still bound, he watched her lean closer, every motion curious, waiting for fear to rise in him. But none came. His stillness disturbed her. She had heard every cry, every scream of drowning men, yet never silence, never defiance. The absence of fear rang louder than panic. She sang longer than she intended, caught in her own sound, caught in the way he listened. The melody drifted and folded, the cavern glowing brighter as though the sea itself leaned in to hear. When she stopped, the quiet struck like a wound, and she realized she missed the way he had absorbed every note. She should have ended him, as she had ended countless others, yet hesitation rooted itself where instinct once ruled. Night after night she returned. Sometimes she hummed. Sometimes she sang full phrases, her tones stripped of the poison that once guided fleets to ruin. He remained her captive, but the balance began to shift. She found herself lingering longer, restless when apart, waiting for his eyes to steady her again. What had been hunger was now curiosity, and what had been a predator's triumph grew into something far stranger, an addiction not to screams, but to silence, and to the single human who did not yield. Days blurred into one another, marked only by the ebb and flow of her presence. He remained bound, yet no longer thought of as a prisoner awaiting execution, but as something she could not release nor destroy. She returned again and again, each time with new intention, each time with a voice that carried less venom and more yearning. What once shattered minds now carried weight softer than waves against sand, and though he never bowed, he never turned from it. His stillness was not resistance born of despair, but patience sharpened into defiance. She began to bring him fragments of the sea, shells that sang when currents touched them, glowing fish that pulsed with color, food he accepted without thanks. His silence unsettled her more than pleas would have, yet it kept her tethered. Every time she sang, his eyes followed, steady, unflinching, and something inside her twisted. No prey had ever listened without fear. None had given her voice meaning beyond destruction. It was during one of these restless vigils that she asked the question burning within her, why he had not screamed when death closed in. His reply was simple, unadorned, carried without tremor, because fear feeds monsters. The words struck with more force than any weapon, unraveling the certainty she had carried for centuries. Fear had always been her nourishment, her assurance of power, and here was a human who denied her that feast. In silence, he had starved her of victory. The words lingered in her like a wound she could not heal. She sang again, softer still, the notes trembling with uncertainty. For the first time, she realized her songs were no longer weapons but confessions. Each lullaby carried her doubt, her craving, her need to be heard not as a terror of the sea, but as something else. He listened as always, not with awe, not with worship, but with the calm patience that had undone her. When he finally hummed back, low, imperfect, human, she froze. His voice lacked the magic of hers, yet it carried a weight she had never known. It was raw, unrefined, unthreatening, but it joined her melody without faltering. For the first time in her existence, she sang with someone instead of at them. Their voices wove together, predator and prey reshaping each other through sound, the cavern holding a harmony never meant to exist. She realized then that she no longer visited to keep him alive, but to keep herself from unraveling. His silence had taught her fearlessness. His voice, however frail, had given her something beyond conquest. She had lured countless ships to doom, Yet this single human had anchored her more deeply than the ocean ever could. And though he remained bound, she understood that it was she who had been captured. The water carried whispers, not her own. Others of her kind had begun to notice the change in her songs, the lack of shipwrecks, the silence where death should have reigned. Pressure coiled around her, warnings delivered through the currents, a demand for proof that she still belonged to them. The human she kept alive had become the measure of her betrayal, and his existence was a threat to her place among the sirens. She returned to him with conflict in her eyes, circling closer, torn between instinct and the unfamiliar pull that bound her to him. He did not flinch, did not beg, even as her claws brushed the strands that held him. His voice broke the water's stillness with calm defiance. If she meant to kill him, then she should sing. But he warned her that if she did, her song would never truly be hers again. It would belong to him, carried in memory, reshaped by the silence he had given her. Her hand lingered on his bindings, trembling with a choice she had never faced. The weight of centuries pressed against her instinct to kill, but the pull of his unyielding presence struck deeper than habit. The lullabies she had once offered in secrecy now became her own tether, and in that moment she understood she could not sever what he had given her. With a sharp motion, she tore the seaweed bonds away. The cavern seemed to shift as he stood free, water swirling with a new energy that no siren had sung into being before. He did not flee, nor did he cower. He looked at her with the same calm defiance that had first unsettled her, and for the first time, she felt the weight of choice not as a curse, but as liberation. She had lured thousands to doom, yet the only song that mattered now was the one he had forced her to create, one without death, one that belonged to them alone. Together they left the grotto, moving into waters that no longer carried the command of her kind. Her voice no longer called fleets to ruin. It lingered only for him, a lullaby no ear but his would ever hear. And though the sea still whispered that she had been tamed, the truth was far less simple. For in the end, she had not claimed him, and he had not conquered her. What bound them was something neither the deep nor the surface could name, a song born from defiance and silence, carried into eternity by a single human who refused to be broken.